I had a feeling there'd be a few people, but yeah. Sure, whenever you're ready to start, I think we can get going.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pamela Scott. I'm the program director for the Historical Society here in Westerly. And I'm very pleased to welcome our third speaker this fall, Zachary, who's our new archivist. And we're really excited to hear from him. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit more. But aside from this, I do want to say the fall has been exciting. We've had great speakers. We are looking at our next program in January. Members only. If you are not a member, envelope in the back. Join us. It's a potluck, weather permitting, potluck research sharing. We'll be sharing our research that we're doing on the side. It'll be a lot of fun. A lot of people participate. It's our third year of doing the potluck sharing, and it's a lot of fun. So that's January, and look for that. Today, Zach, thanks. Welcome.
And good afternoon, everyone. And as Pam said, my name is Zachary Garceau, and I am the archivist for the Westerly Historical Society, which is a position that I've been filling since May of this year. Before starting here, I also interned at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., and at the Rhode Island State Archives. And currently, I also work as a researcher for the New England Historic Genealogical Society. So genealogy and genealogical research are something that's really important to me, and it's something you'll see throughout my presentation, and a lot that we have in the collection reflects that, and that's what I'll be talking a little bit more about today. So what I do for the Historical Society is I conduct inventories of our collections, and I make myself familiar with our holdings, so when we get a lot of inquiries and people ask for certain items, we can be sure of what we have and help them with as much as we can. And also, I have worked on creating a comprehensive database of everything that we have, and I've done this using the Past Perfect museum software, which allows us to search our entire collection using keywords. So if, for instance, someone asks for any information that we have on baseball in Westerly, we could go right to the program and search for items on baseball and share with them anything that's available. And our goal is eventually to have a record for every single item in Past Perfect, which is a goal we're well on our way to. As you'll see in the presentation, we have a lot of things that are in our collection, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but we're making very good progress on that. And lastly, perhaps the most important, is making sure that all the items that we have are being properly preserved using high archival standards so that they'll be here for years and years to come and everyone will be able to use them going forward. So about the collections that we have, they are housed in our climate-controlled vault, which is directly below us at the Babcock-Smith House. And we have nearly 1,000 unique non-photographic items, which include postcards, account books, club notes, deeds, and probate records, which are very important for genealogical research. Newspapers, which includes others aside from the Westerly Sun. We have some Mystic and also Watch Hill newspapers. And also scrapbooks, which contain a lot of newspaper clippings and a lot of unique items you won't find anywhere else. We also have a lot of books, maps, ship logs, which you'll see some examples of very soon, and ephemera from local businesses. And we also have thousands of photographs in a variety of mediums, which I'll be discussing shortly. So now I'd just like to talk about some of the better items, I think, in our collection that are really helpful for research and also really interesting. We have some excellent one-of-a-kind items which contain a lot of genealogical information which you really won't be able to find anywhere else. Among these are the Babcock collection, which is a large collection of personal family documents containing information on a variety of local families. A lot of names that you might know, like Wilcox, Hiscox, Brown, others like that, and Ward and others. Have a lot of information on those. And personal letters mentioning relatives, and that's actually probably my favorite item in the entire collection, is a series of letters that were written during World War I from soldiers who were written back home to Westerly. And while a lot of the information might seem a little bit mundane, mostly because they weren't allowed to talk too much about the war effort because that would probably be redacted by higher officers who would read these letters, it really gives a lot of information and a lot of information on the everyday experiences of soldiers. So another thing which I actually want to talk about a little bit more here is the individual sheets with family records. A lot of these were written between about 1870 and 1930. The reason for this is that was really when genealogy started to take off in America. You'll find that a lot of published genealogies started to pop up around then, and the reason for that is because when genealogy was gaining popularity, what the authors would do is they would draft up questionnaires and surveys, and they would send them out to people, whether they were people with the same surname or connected surnames or anyone who was thought to be related to the family. They would ask a series of questions and what information that they knew about that family, and sometimes the information that they gave could not be verified, especially if it was uncited or it was just coming from memory. And then the recipient of the questionnaires would send those back to the author, and sometimes those would be reported as fact without any much substantial support. So I always caution people when they're using these family records to view them with a little bit of skepticism, but that being said, I certainly think that they are a good starting point for genealogical research, because what you could always do is take a look at the family record, see what information it provides to you, and then do your own research and find the documents that would support that. So they're a good way to start, but I wouldn't consider them to be the end-all be-all for research. And actually, as you can see right here, is a family record from the Babcock collection, and it's a little bit harder to see, but I can give you a little bit of detail from memory here. So it's actually from 1879. It was sent from an Asher N. Babcock to, it was sent to Asher N. Babcock from a Thomas B. Stillman of New York. And you'll actually see here, it is about a man named Daniel Edwards, and he actually died in 1878, and this was written in 1879. So there's a pretty good chance that they actually knew each other, and this information could probably be supported pretty well. So that one I would consider to be more reliable, but this is just a good example of what you might find in that collection. So now I just want to talk a little bit about some of my favorite items in the entire collection. One of which is actually two of which are two documents which are signed by two different United States presidents. And we also have some mathematics school books which are dating back to 1764, and the others are from 1817 and 1827. Also, as an avid postcard collector myself, I am really interested in the collection of postcards that we have here, and account books and day books from local firms and businesses and also individuals, and the Watch Hill Lighthouse Keepers journals. And actually, I'd just like to ask, can anyone take a guess as to who the two US presidents whose signatures we have here are? Anyone? Yes, that's one of them. Anyone else? No. Anything? George Washington? Close, but it's close. No, a little bit before that. So, no, actually, sorry. Jumped the gun a little bit, but so the first one is Thomas Jefferson. It's 1806, and it is a charter for the brig Harlequin, and you can actually see his signature right there. And the other one is James Madison, and that's from 1811, and that's right there, and that's for a charter for the brig Freeman. Now actually, we have two signatures by James Madison because he also signed the 1806 document, but that's when he was Secretary of State and not President, so that was before that. And then some of the mathematics books, which are really interesting in that they show the different lesson plans and how math was taught then, and it differs significantly from how it is today. So I think it's really fascinating to look at these and just see how lesson plans might have evolved over time. So some of those are really fascinating. And now some of the postcards, and these are some of my favorites. And if you actually look, you can tell that all of these are from the same place. These are from Bay Street and Watch Hill, and some of them even you can tell are from the same angle. So it's really, really important to look at them and notice how the landscape has changed, showing the same view over time. And you can even tell that the two on the right here have telephone poles, whereas the two on the left do not. So that can actually give you a pretty good indication of around the time period as to when those might have been done. And also this one on the bottom, as you can tell, it's a photograph. It looks to be more recent than the other three. And now what we have are some of the Watch Hill Light Station Keepers logs. And those you can tell a lot of the time it was just recorded as to the weather conditions and also the time when that was recorded. And you can also see the signatures of all the keepers there. And then we have the firm of Stanton and Brown, their daybook from 1793. Now, some people might not realize that these daybooks could be really important for genealogical research because, say, for example, you have an ancestor, they show up in the 1790 census, but they don't show up in the 1800 census. So you can surmise that they very well may have died between 1790 and 1800, but we don't know exactly when. If you were to go through a daybook such as this, and then suddenly in a page for 1793, you see your ancestor's name, that's really important because that lets you know they were still alive then. So you can actually narrow down when they may have died. So those can be really important for giving some information that we might not automatically think of. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the photographs that we have in our collection. So in our collections, we have several large photograph collections, including the Burt collection, the Westerly Sun glass plates, and the Ed N. Burdick collection. And the photographs exist in several different mediums, including glass plate negatives. And actually, I'd just like to point out now that when you are working with the glass plate negatives, it's important to wear the white cotton gloves, which my wife lovingly refers to as my Mickey Mouse gloves. And I'm sure you can tell why. So the glass plate negatives you can see right here they come in a variety of sizes, and they're negatives in the fact that what should be light is dark and what should be dark is light. And this one, if we actually hold it correctly, is from 1886, and that's from Stonington. So we have many hundreds of those actually. And also the glass slides, which this is difficult to see, but I'll actually have an example in just a moment. But this is actually a colored glass slide, which are a little bit more rare, but they're very interesting. And the stereogram cards, which are these cards which you may have seen before, they're two duplicate images, and how they would work is you would put them in here and you would use them and you would put it right up to your face, and it would actually kind of give a 3D effect because it's the same image twice, and the way that you'd be looking at it would give it an effect as if it's a 3D image. We have a lot of those, and a lot of those are famous destinations and also vacation spots over time. So those are really interesting. And also, this is extremely hard to see in this light, but a tintype, which is when the photographic negative would be pressed onto a piece of metal and it would give you an image like this one right here. And of course, a somewhat more recent type would be the Kodak slides, which I'm sure many people will remember are the ones that you would put in a slide projector, the little cardboard slides. So we have a few collections of those as well. And actually, here's an example, it's not the same one, but a very similar one to the one I just held up of the colored glass slide. So you can actually see the colors really come out well. And we have quite a few of those. And then another thing that we do, which is a large part of what we do here, is responding to inquiries. So the inquiries we respond to are just general questions and also providing image reproductions and photocopies on request. So since taking over in May, I have received, and I actually have 13 here, but over the last few days I've taken a few more, so it's probably closer to 15 inquiries about our collections, and we have accepted 3 different donated collections, which include menus from local restaurants, previously unseen photos of the hurricane of 1938, and photo albums and portraits of prominent local individuals and families. And now I just want to talk about the different types of inquiries we get. There's 3 major types. The first is genealogical, which is what information do you have on my family? Or also, do you have a record of my ancestor's birth or death? Or where did my ancestor live? And that's usually more specific, like what house was it or what was their address? We also get a lot of questions about buildings, such as who lived in the, say, Stillman building in 1890? Or where was Wilson's dry goods store in 1906, for example? And probably the most popular inquiry we get is about photographs, which is, do you have any images of my ancestor? Do you have any photos of my ancestor's house? Or do you have any photos of an event such as a shipwreck that occurred in 1888? And actually, so you would think that because we are a town historical society, we might get a lot of inquiries that are simply from the area, which is generally true, but I think it's really important to show that we get inquiries as far as Minnesota, Washington, California, and Texas. We pretty much are getting them from every corner of the country. So the impact that Westerly's history has had on people from throughout the country is really quite large when looking at it on a map like this. And that's just since January of this year. And what I'd like to talk about now is preserving your own collections, because I know that there's probably several people here who have things in their home that they've thought about possibly using preservation techniques before and think that really should be stored properly. So, I'm sorry, actually, whoever is near the lights, if we could, thank you so much. So actually, I just want to show very quickly, whenever possible, I would highly recommend using archival boxes. They come in a variety of colors, but they're generally going to look like this, and they come in pretty much every size you can imagine. These are very important for properly storing items, and especially documents and photos. Also, you certainly would want to try to store items in a neutral environment, because heat tends to accelerate deterioration of documents, but also humidity is very important. If there's too high of humidity, it really can accelerate or lead to mold growth, and that's something that's very difficult to get rid of and can be very harmful to documents. And low humidity will actually make them more brittle and easily destroyed. So you really want to try to find a balance as well as possible. I would definitely recommend using a dehumidifier. And also, sorry, just one moment. One thing which, if anyone has listened to me talk about preserving documents at all, I'm sure they've heard me talk about this, because something that I feel very strongly about is I would highly recommend not using metal paper clips or staples, because they can rust over time and they can damage documents. Now, I don't know if anyone can see that from here, but you'll notice the 2 large brown spots on this document. That is because before it came to us, it was held together by metal staples, which, very similar to these ones here, are completely rusted, and that's just from over time, and that can't be fixed. That's going to be there for a very long time, and that just can lead to a lot of damage to documents, which is pretty irreversible. So I always recommend that people avoid that whenever they can. And if you do need to use anything to hold these together, I would recommend using plastic paper clips, because they're less damaging than the metal ones, and staples are definitely should be avoided at all cost. And another thing that's important is to try to keep collections as they were found, because you need to remember that somebody in the past arranged those items exactly the way that they are and the way that they were given to us, and there's a reason for that. We may not know what that reason is, but there is a reason that these items were stored exactly as they were. So if you're able to keep them that way and they're arranged as they originally were, that's generally pretty important and something that I would highly recommend. And as I mentioned earlier, the white cotton gloves are very important when dealing with photographs and glass plates or sensitive documents, because it can avoid fingerprints and any kind of contamination, and it'll help prolong the life of the documents. And once you get fingerprints on some of the glass plates, especially the more sensitive ones, very hard to get off and very difficult to take care of. So I would recommend the gloves. And now I'd actually just like to open it up and ask if anybody has any questions, either about our holdings or about preserving your own collections, or any other questions? Yes, Sam?
I'm interested to know how we came to be in possession of the Watch Hill Light records when they have their own museum.
And the president of the Lighthouse would love to know that too.
Yes. And, well, to be quite honest, I am actually unsure of how we came into that possession. That was before I had started here. That's an item that I just was able to, when processing all of our collections, came across. I'm not sure how we...
I think we're going to get to that.
Yes, I don't quite know how that happened, but
Well, I'm glad
yes.
actually you have them, because the museum is a little chilly right now. So they're probably in a better location. But
Yes.
we'd like to see them.
Okay, sure.
White Brown, Chris White,
Mhm.
goes back a long way in our
Yes.
archives, and knows him intimately, so
Mhm.
you might have an idea. He might.
I have a question about
Yes.
the stereo
Mm-hmm. Yes.
unit, because as I
Mhm.
was talking to you before the talk, we actually have one of those
Mhm.
from my husband's family with personal photographs. And you recommend an archival box with a photograph
Yes.
obviously not posted. What do you write your notes on? And how do you attach notes to collections?
Well, for what we do here, using the Past Perfect software, we would assign every single one, including every single card in time eventually, would have a number, and we'd keep a record of that, and then you could just search by number. But for somebody who would be doing it on their own, I would possibly recommend the same method in a way, assigning it a number and maybe recording those notes elsewhere, and whether it be on a computer or even handwritten.
Are you putting a pencil mark on the back? Or where are you putting your number?
Yes,
And how does that-
if you can, yeah.
Really? Do you really?
Well, these ones don't actually yet, because I don't believe that this one would be numbered. So maybe what we would have done in that case would be to process them as, what's that? Oh, yes, actually, and also digitizing them would actually be a very good solution to that. You could, I think you had mentioned this earlier, was scanning them, the front and the back, because the back also gives you a lot of information on the location and things of that nature. It doesn't quite give a year, but sometimes you can estimate, or it might say on the front. But I think digitizing them is actually the best option, because in that way...
That flash drive too in the box? Everything in the box?
Yes, if possible. The flash drives wouldn't be as large of a concern, but I would say keeping everything together would be ideal. I would certainly do that, and then that way if you do digitize them, then you can just save it and the file name could be the number, and then that way you could keep a pretty good record of what it is that you have. So, and if not, it wouldn't be incredibly harmful to possibly write the number as small as possible in the corner. That's how people did it before computers, largely, but so that's possible, but digitizing it would be the least harmful of all.
Put it in a sleeve, an acetate sleeve, and then put something on the sleeve.
That is also actually a very good solution to that. They make sleeves in pretty much every size you could imagine, so I'm sure they do make them in those dimensions. So actually that's one way that we do them, which might actually be why that one isn't numbered right now, because we also do have a lot of photographs, and I think that's actually what we have with our postcard collection, is we have the individual sleeves, and a lot of them seem to be numbered. And in that way, if you do write on there, you could also, if you write it in pencil, always write in pencil, don't ever use pen for that. You can generally, if you feel that you can erase it without causing any damage, then that could also work once you're able to label the sleeves. So. Yes?
What kinds of things are you looking for, and what kinds of things do you not want?
Well, we are looking for a large number of things, honestly. Anything really related to local history. If you think it's relevant, we can always assess that and let you know. But the only thing I can think off the top of my head that we're really not looking for are Bibles, because we have a lot of them and they tend to take up a lot of room. And even if it was someone who lived in Westerly who owned it, I don't know that that's something we'd have a lot of room for. The only thing that we may want from Bibles, especially if they can be scanned even, is families would used to record a lot of genealogical information the first few pages. That can be really helpful, but when we've got 1,000-page books, and they tend to add up, unfortunately. So that's one thing that we may not necessarily be able to take in, but we are always looking for more photographs, and also just anything from local businesses, or really anything that has to do with the history of Westerly. If it's not too large of an item, we generally will be able to take it in. So, sorry. Yes, sir?
I have a postcard collection too. How relates to all this here? Is it in the plastic?
Yes.
It is.
Yes. So what we have right now is we do have the postcard binders, and they make the archival sleeves that have, these are actually the two, but the 4-slot options, which you can store those in a binder, and that's generally a pretty safe option. The other way that we may move to is they make archival boxes like this, but they're actually a lot thinner, and they are going to be longer, and you can store the postcards like that, and then it may be more expensive, but you can actually put the postcards in individual sleeves and then store those in a box. That's another way of doing it.
If the library has that.
Yes, so either way would be preferable. I'm going back and forth as to which way we want to do it here, but right now we do have them in the binders.
I'm from the Historical Society.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's safe to bring them out.
If you can bring them in an environment that, like I said, it's not too humid, and the temperature can kind of be regulated, even inside a house would be preferable to a garage for sure. What I would recommend is I don't have them with me, but we have what we call the manuscript boxes, which are a little taller than this and a little bit wider, and they open from the top. And how we have our local business records in there is we have folders which are of this size actually, and we kind of have them sorted. We actually have a few folders of local business information and then put those inside of the manuscript box. And that's probably the easiest way to sort them, and especially
Mice have gotten into them and all that. I mean,
that could be, unfortunately.
would it be best not to take them out at all and not have them out?
No.
I just don't know. I don't want to throw them away.
Oh, well, I mean, certainly if they're in a condition which they're only going to get worse if they're being stored outside or in a environment which would be harmful to them, I would certainly recommend trying to get them into an environment that would facilitate them staying in as good of condition as they are. If they're not in a great environment right now, I definitely wouldn't recommend keeping them there if you can avoid that. If you're able to, like I said, get them in a manuscript box, that would be okay. But even if it was something like this box, and if you can get acid-free paper, which is generally pretty cost-effective, and put that between as many items as you can that way in a box like this, and then that way at least that'll stop any kind of deterioration or at least slow it down that's been going on. So if at all possible, I would definitely recommend moving them in some way. Even if there is damage to it, the damage could get worse if it's kept the way that it is currently. So I would certainly recommend doing anything you could with that. I'm sorry, Ed, you had a question?
I was just going to mention that some of the folks who've been long-time members might recall that we've got something over 100 historic local postcards on DVD, and we're selling those. We probably don't have too many of them left, but and frankly, I don't know whether we could make more DVDs or not, because I don't know the original source to go back that far. But it's really great. In fact, the local art teacher has used those for art classes and things for historic.
Oh, I didn't know that's, oh.
But, it was a really nice job. I don't think any of us know where those originated.
The other thing I want to point out is the beautiful glass slides or negatives that you're showing and other photographic material. If you go to the Weekapog in the stairway between the first and second floor, there are our beautiful photographs from our historical society. They work with us to get them printed and be able to display them. And there's another business downtown that just, which one is that?
Is it the Tapped Apple? Is that the one that we?
That's
Yes.
the new one has historic photographs from this collection. So please go and see them so you can enjoy our photographs out in the world. It's just marvelous.
Yes. Yes, and Maria?
Well, some of those inquiries are stumpers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
like, what kind of resources do you use to answer those, and how much can we do with the collection that we've got?
That's a great question. So we have gotten some questions where they'll be very broad in the sense that, it's, do you have any information on my family? And a lot of it is just knowing around what time period they may have been in Westerly and they were living, because we have some scrapbooks, which is actually one that I solved in a way where they asked, what do you have on my family? And it was a Pendleton family, which it wasn't one of the more well-known branches of that family, actually. And I was actually able to find in one of our scrapbooks, just because I knew that the author was a Pendleton, and they were from around the time period when his mother, or I guess it would probably be an aunt in that case, would have probably had died. So I just kind of went through that book and I found an obituary, which I don't think they had seen. But there's a lot of cases where there might be just knowing what it is that we have, and if it's a more broad collection, we can maybe take as much time as is reasonable in a lot of ways and go through that and hopefully have some luck with that. I usually ask people when they do make inquiries, if at all they can, is to give us as much information as possible as far as dates, names, anything like that. Now, that's actually becoming a lot easier now that we have Past Perfect and that's up and running, because I'm going through every single document, and any name that's mentioned, I'm putting in the keyword searches. So now if somebody says, do you have any record of this person, we can hopefully go through and search, and any record that they're referenced in, we'll be able to pull out and do and take a look at. So that's something that's going to take a little bit of time, but it'll, in the long run, save us a lot of time. So,
We've
yes,
gotten
Anne?
actually international requests in the past.
Oh, yes.
Last year, a fellow wrote to us from Medellin, Colombia, South America, asking about an industry in town years ago that produced these cycle cars, which are homemade kit cars using motorcycle engines. So that whole inquiry actually turned into a feature article in the newsletter. So once in a while, and we've gotten, I think, Scotland, England, Germany, things like this in the past. So, you know,
Yeah.
Westerlyites and their descendants can wind up as a
Mhm.
in the world.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Zachary, you know, I'm familiar with the library collection,
Mhm.
the honors collection, and the art collection upstairs, that kind of thing. Do you have a vision for those four institutions being able to share information, you know, whether it's on the internet or with each other or whatever? Here at the museum, we use Past Perfect as well. You know, how do we help somebody find the right place to ask the questions?
That is a great question, and actually that's something I would like to do in the future. Right now, even as you know, we work pretty closely with the Babcock Smith House. We actually are storing a lot of our books in their library collection as well, so that's becoming a little bit more integrated. But I think that I'd certainly like to be more familiar with the collections of other institutions. The Westerly Armory is another one, which they have quite a bit, and we've actually, if there's an item which doesn't really fit our mission, we've actually, you know, donated a few items to the Armory as well, and I think they've done the same in the past for us. And it's just really important, I think, to know people who work in these various organizations, which is something that I think we already do, because at a board meeting or even just in an email, I'll mention a question that we have and I'll send it to everyone, and they'll say, oh, you know, talk to this person at that institution that I may not have met before, but they end up being very, very helpful. So I think in a lot of ways we're able to do that now, but eventually it would be ideal, especially as you mentioned, using the internet, to really have everything be in a more uniform place, especially because there are so many institutions where you wouldn't always think to look. People might come to us first because we're, you know, larger, overarching. Mm-hmm.
Last week, the gal from Yale who spoke on Pawcatuck, she had a great story because she was looking for a particular piece, and through establishing a network and talking to a variety of people and always, you know, bringing it to light, she ended up finding a portrait in Stonington that was, it was such an aha moment. She'd been talking about it, and the gal said, oh yeah, it's upstairs in the library. I know exactly where it is. And it was just, you know, it was about that collaborative effort. So it really paid off to know
Yes,
the
and-
resources and to build that network.
And I also think that being a genealogist, I'm kind of familiar with these problems, and it's something that's frustrated me in the past. Even if it's somewhere like in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, I would contact their historical society and they'd be like, oh, we'll talk to this person, and then it's a place that's open one day a month or something, which happens more often than you'd think. And so these are problems that I'm familiar with, and so they're ones that I hope to solve in the future so that other people won't have to face them as well. So in the future, that's definitely something I think we would like to do. And yes, sir?
Going back to the Lighthouse Society, nobody knows right now where that item came from. And possibility, no one will ever know, you know, because whoever donated it years ago, or whatever, nobody remembers. Somebody maybe passed away or whatever. Should it be now, from now on, anyone donates anything to the society, you should have documentation.
Oh, yes.
Where that item came from. And if that person knows of any history behind that item. So in the future, you can now call that person up and say, hey, do you know anything about this? You donated this piece. Do you know where it came from? Who gave it to you? Where it came, or whatever it may be? Who knows? Maybe the person who donated it was a relative of the lighthouse keeper from years ago, but we don't know that.
Yes, and
So each item that from now on is donated to the society, there should be a little note or someplace saying that piece, that item came from so-and-so on such and such a date.
yes, and actually, we do have a pretty comprehensive system for that now, which we've actually been using for a few years, where people will send us an item. They'll usually send a letter along with it. We have a folder of all the letters, which are numbered in the corner, and if it's, say, 2009.0001, and then the letter would be 001A, and then the item would be B, or something like that, so that we can make sure that they are connected in our system. And also, I've had a lot of newer items where people will send sometimes a folder of information about the item, and that'll go in our manuscript collection, and that would be 001C, so that all these items can be linked together, and then that way we're entirely sure of where they're going. And also, we send a letter and a gift receipt to everyone who donates an item now, so that also is another item, so it'll be, D at the end of that. And so we have several different items which would allow us to know where that came from. And also, I find that a lot of people, when they're donating these items, especially if they're something that's really important to them or their family, they don't hesitate to let us know that, and that's a good thing, because then in their letter, they'll give us as much information as they possibly know about that. One example was the photographs from the hurricane of 1938 we recently took in. The photos were taken by her grandfather, and they said he was probably about age 17, or well, they know he was because of the date, and they say he was 17 years old, and they gave us his name and any information they had about him. So now not only do we know who donated them, but also about the person who took them. So that's something that we're really trying to do going forward. A lot of the items that we have that were taken in very long time ago, I mean, we've been around since 1913, so there have been a lot of different systems that were used for that. But new items that we're taking in, we have a system that we're really hoping will give us as much information as possible about every item. So are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
What are the plans to make, say, the index for the collection available online so people can search before contacting you?
That's something that I've considered before, and it's something that once it's completed, that's something that we're going to be bringing up at some of our board meetings. I'm not sure exactly what the plans would be for that yet, but I'm really hoping that's something we could be able to do going forward, because that would be really helpful for a lot of people, myself included even, just doing research and being able to identify these items going forward. So I'm really hoping that we'll be able to get that online. I'm not sure exactly what the plan is quite yet, but if it is something we're going to have online, it'll definitely be in the newsletter, and we'll be sure to let everyone know. So. Yes, sir.
What do you do with material that's sent to you that have no interest in?
That we have no interest in? Well, generally, we don't get too many things that are sent to us completely out of the blue. We get a lot of inquiries via email and phone calls where before they send it, they make sure to say, are you interested in this? And for the most part, we would generally let them know yes or no if we can assess it based on the description they give us. But we have gotten items in the past that were just sent to us, in which case I would take a look over the items, and then I would think who would best benefit from having this item. And if it's something that just doesn't really fit our mission, I would definitely inquire with other institutions and say, do you want this item? Do you think this would fit better in your collection? And generally they would say, yes, we'd like that. And from there, we can kind of exchange it for them or send it over to them. And that way we know it's going to a place that people would expect to find it, and also that really fits with what they're trying to say to the public. So, yes.
Are you familiar with anyone that can help us get some old maps restored? They've been put away for a long time, and where they're creased, they're falling apart, and the paper is falling at the edges, but they are maps of Flanagan time that we want to save. We don't quite know who to go to in trying to fix them up somehow.
I personally don't know of anyone who would, yes.
We had a speaker from Charter Oak
Okay,
Scanning.
perfect.
And it's Charter Oak Scanning. And I'm not sure what they can do to your originals, but once they have it scanned in, they can certainly clean it up and give it back to you in digital format. It's a Charter Oak, like the credit union, it's Charter Oak Scanning.
Are they,
The Velvet Mill.
yeah, I was going to say, are they in the Velvet Mill? Yes. I'm sorry, what was that?
There's a paper conservator who works
Oh,
on zoning as well. I think
yes.
also maybe in the Velvet Mill. I can't
Oh.
remember her name.
Yes, I don't remember,
She has
but,
done work
mhm.
for a lot of local museums.
Oh, okay, excellent. Mhm.
If they're in the same building or not, I don't know. Yeah. But if you take a look at her showing that to Google.
Sorry, anyone else? Is that-
Oh, are the archive boxes, I'm assuming they're acid-free, am I correct?
Yes, they are. So I know there's a few companies, but Hollinger is the most popular one. Everything in their catalog is going to be of archival quality, and they would be acid-free. So when you're looking for boxes, that is something that you'd want to look for, is that they're acid-free and if they're archival quality, in which case most would be if they're going to be of this kind. So that is very important because using the acid-free paper and the acid-free boxes will help curb deterioration. So, yep. Yes.
How long does an acid-free box remain acid-free?
That is actually a great question. I don't quite know. Sorry, actually, does anyone have a solution?
They say about 5 years.
Is that okay?
Replaced.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that. Yeah. Yes. Okay, I didn't. Yeah.
But I don't know anybody who replaced it.
Yes, they can be quite pricey, so that is an issue that a lot of people face. So, yeah. I'm sorry, is that all the questions? Are we? All right, well, thank you all for coming, and actually I have some items up here if anyone wants to come take a look afterwards. So, all right, thank you.